I originally thought I would tell you something about my early life, and then I decided that the place to start was the place that is the beginning of my Buddhist practice. So we'll skip the things before. I somehow wound up at Minnesota Zen Center, and after 3 years, I dared to try this thing they called sesshin. Everyone said the first 2 days are the hardest.
You need to define sesshin in this group.
I'll get there.
Okay. I'm just preliminary.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Everyone said the first 2 days are the hardest, so I didn't do a weekend sesshin. I did a 7-day sesshin, which is done annually honoring Buddha's enlightenment. We do that in December, which is not the same as when you do it, probably. The word means to settle the mind. And what it means in practice, with the teacher I was with then, it meant you're in the zendo at 5 minutes to 5, you leave at 10 minutes to 9 p.m., and in between then, you have a lot of 40-minute sitting periods and walking and chanting and eating with this very formal, complicated thing known as oryoki, which is Japanese for eating bowls, and about an hour of work practice. With the teacher I have now, it means you're in the zendo at 4 and you leave at 9. And you have just sitting, eating, walking, and fortunately, more than a half-hour break after meals. People think we're crazy. So that tells you something about me, that I like to sit for 14 hours a day. However, when I finally got up my nerve to do a full sesshin, it was 1986, and I showed up, and I was really lucky. For some reason, I wasn't having knee pain. Sitting all day without knee pain is somehow extraordinary, but I mostly didn't have it. And the reason I talk about that sesshin is because somehow something slipped in my mind. On about the 3rd day, the teacher's talk started making sense, which is pleasant. They had been just mumbo-jumbo before that. And later on, eventually I figured out that it was the sitting that made them make sense. It was not that he was getting smarter. And I don't remember when it was, but somewhere in that time period, I became aware that everything I had thought and everything I thought I understood about Buddhism was absolutely not true. It was like there was this house made of glass, and the process threw rocks and broke all the glass, and I was free. I had not known I was imprisoned, but then I knew that I had been imprisoned, and that made me free. What followed was I became very excited about practice. The next year I went to every single sesshin, including the short ones. I went to sitting almost every morning, unless I was too tired to get out of bed, and kind of reorganized my life. So that was 1986. And I realized that's the starting point of everything. Somewhere soon after that, I developed an insane, irrational wish to be ordained. It was not logical. It was just a craving. And we know about cravings. I asked the teacher to ordain me. He said, "You're not ready." And then he assigned me a major temple office, which I did as well as I could. It took me 17 years to get ordained, partly because he died, and the next teacher I picked just was not in a hurry about such things. They said, "You picked the slowest guy in the world." And then finally I went to, my present teacher is Shohaku Okumura, who is becoming increasingly well known because he translates and he writes. And I'm very happy I did that. So during all this time, there was still something kind of missing. And that missing thing was, what am I going to do? I had this feeling like there was something I was supposed to do, like not just get a job and so forth, but I didn't know what it was. And I kept thinking, well, maybe when I'm done with my training, I'll know what it is. Well, I got done with my training, I was allowed to leave the place, and I still didn't know. I went off to spend 6 months as an interim priest in Anchorage, Alaska, because I still didn't know, and it seemed like a fine thing to do. And finally, oh yeah, and I had had no time for activism. I was like, the study and the practice comes first. So, but I got very involved in things that were happening locally. So once I was no longer in training at the temple, I was free to go places and do things, and it just happened, seemed like an accident, that the thing that I did was I went to a mass arrest thing in front of the White House about the Keystone KXL, the planned Keystone Pipeline. And I went there, I wore my robes, I got arrested in my robes, I did a lot of sitting, and I hung out. And then I went home. I still had to do 2 monastic training periods of 3 months each. And I went to a place called Tassajara that I had been to before. And I sat down in the meditation hall, not quite the first day, but I was sitting there looking at the wall because that's what we do, and I kept seeing walking along the pipeline. I saw groups of people, including me, walking along the pipeline. That's not what you're supposed to do while you're sitting, but it wouldn't go away. And finally, I asked for help. I asked the teachers there. I talked with various people. Oh, Steve Stuckey, who is no longer alive, said, "Oh, I think that would be helpful." And then he said, "I'll come." So that was a great deal of encouragement from a person of, status and wisdom and all that stuff. Because being helpful is the point. I've always wanted to be helpful. I spent the next year getting ready. I also, during that time, received Dharma transmission, which is a lot of ceremonies, and you go to Japan to kind of finish things off. And my teacher said, so it became leading a walk. And the walk had the title, The Compassionate Earth Walk, all of which was like, I had a lot of time to think while I was in the monastery. Even not including Zendo time, sitting time. There's a lot of free time there. You're not paying bills or cooking supper. So the name, The Compassionate Earth Walk, and then I was out there organizing and inviting people to come with me and so forth. And my teacher said, don't do it until after you receive Dharma transmission. So I was to do it in my role as a teacher, not in my role as a student monk. student, priest, whatever. Anyway, so I did this. I had done long walks a couple of other times, and I knew that I loved walking. I loved the practice of walking and pilgrimage. Let me see. So there was a group of people that came with me, most of them very young. Sometimes I felt like a school teacher. I finally had to tell them, you're not allowed to say I have control issues. Really. And they actually stopped saying it, but they didn't stop acting out. But that's not what's important, because there was this whole group thing and being a leader and stuff going on, and there was meeting people. You're walking along the side of Burr Road in Montana or in Alberta, and people go, what the heck is this? Nobody walks on the road out here. They drive. So people would stop a lot and ask us what we were doing. And it was interesting. Well, the person who came up with the best answer, I said, this is not a protest. We are not protesting. I don't do protest. I do prayer and I do practice. I don't do protest. So the person who came up with the answer that we all came to use said it's like a prayer walk. No, he said it's like a peace walk. And then sometimes there's like a prayer walk. The Native Americans do prayer walks really a lot. So those were the languages we did. And someone very creatively, a newspaper person, decided to say that we were protesting the state of mind that created things like the pipeline. Because I would talk about the state of mind, the mind of separation, and thinking that we were separate from the earth and we could control it and there would be no consequences to our actions. Everybody got good at not saying we were protesting and at expressing that. And when I think about it, that's pretty good. So meeting people was wonderful. And we got to learn a lot about why people were in favor of the pipeline. We have 100 people in this town, and there will be 2 long-term jobs. We don't even have a grocery store anymore. Such and such used to employ people, and now it's gone. And I mean, the heartaches of people in the Midwest dealing with things happening is very, there was so much to learn. I wanted to talk about the actual process of walking. We would go in 2 groups, and each of us would walk about 10 miles a day, because 20 miles a day seemed like a lot. Actually, a lot of people can do 20 miles, but I didn't know that. So we had 10 miles, and your legs get broken in fairly soon. And the point was that it was a meditation kind of walk, that the walking and putting our feet on the ground was spiritual practice. For about the first third of the walk, what I noticed when I did this practice was that the earth was supporting me. Every time my foot touched the ground, I felt the ground reaching up to me. And so it was healing me. Somewhere around the second third of the walk, I started to grasp the other thing, which is what had been in my mind, and that was giving energy to the earth. So placing my foot on the ground and giving it a blessing every time I touched it. And we had a staff. One person carried the staff, and putting the staff on the ground and giving a blessing every time. And in the last part, finally, both of those things were happening at once. I will say on the last day of the walk, I taught people metta practice. And I suggested that we walk silently. I couldn't get them to be silent, but the last day we walked slowly and silently, and people were silently doing metta practice. And at the end, we all agreed that that was the way to do it. So next time, it'll be like that. I totally fell in love with the land. I don't know. Who I am is a result of doing that. And then I went home and I crashed. I was exhausted. I did nothing. I had thought that I would go walk the other part of the Keystone Pipeline down in Texas. I just went to bed. I had thought I was going to write about it. I still haven't. I've been incredibly quiet. I just needed time. And I'm just coming out of that needing time, actually. It was a big deal. Okay, so the next thing, Beth asked me to talk about my time at Standing Rock. Is there anybody here who doesn't know Standing Rock? Okay, so it's another pipeline, Dakota Access Pipeline, was intended to bring oil from North Dakota, where they're doing fracking, which is a environmentally disastrous way to get your oil, and to bring it down to join the Keystone Pipeline. Is that true? Anyway, they said it was for jobs, and they said it was because the United States needs oil, but it's really for export. It's to drive up oil prices. So they put it, so it went just upstream of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Just upstream. They moved it. It was going to be north of, thank you, Bismarck. Yeah. But the dangers of a spill were too great. They didn't want this white people city to have the risk of a spill, so they moved it so only the native people would get hurt if there was a spill. And anyway, some people, I think it was a bunch of youth, started a camp. And this camp grew and grew and grew. And finally, it became a really big thing. People were coming internationally. Indigenous tribes from all over the world were showing up for a little while. And it became the face of resistance to fossil fuels, and specifically pipelines. And meanwhile, I had stuff to do. I was back at home. I organized a couple of vigils, a couple of prayer vigils in support of them. And then I don't like organizing. So the only thing I'm willing to organize is like a vigil or a prayer or a ceremony or that kind, or a meditation retreat. I'm willing to do that. But I had organized a couple of these, and I was really wanted to go to the camp, but I had all these commitments. And finally I saw this called Rohatsu Sesshin. It's a 7-day retreat at the beginning of December, remembering Buddha's enlightenment. It's like, well, I can go then. I have nothing on the schedule because I'm scheduled to go and look at a wall for 7 days. So I did. I went to Standing Rock. I got a ride. I arrived after the first blizzard. I was there during the second blizzard. It was really cold. And although I had expected to do a lot of volunteering and be useful, all I did was, I think I was not a burden. And I wanted to talk about this little bit about what it was like being there. Some of it was, there were thousands of people, and it was not heavily structured. And I think there were people who were working $80 and $100 hours a week, but I don't know. All I knew was if I went to the volunteer tent, people smiled, offered me soup or coffee or something, and answered questions and said, well, you could go over here, you could go over there, and you can sit down if you're tired. And the morning of the blizzard that I was there for, people from the medic tent knocked on every single door. They checked to make sure people were not frozen, and nobody died in 2 major blizzards, totally primitive conditions. Nobody died. So the thing that I remember the most from Standing Rock is morning prayers. And so you're sleeping and it's cold and you're in your sleeping bag, and this voice comes over the loudspeakers. I think they were loudspeakers. Anyway, I hear this voice, a solo voice doing this incredibly beautiful chant, and it goes on for an hour. And I get out of bed and I go down to the sacred fire, which is the place where things happen. Boy, you know, I wish I had pictures, because it's like the sacred fire. There's buildings everywhere, there's tents everywhere, there's cars everywhere, there's beautiful banners on Flag Road. And so I'd go from the place I was staying over past Flag Road, buy all this stuff, and join hundreds of people standing around this fire. And there were prayers led by somebody in the middle. And then there was the water ceremony, which it just constantly amazed me. It turns out, by the way, the Standing Rock tribe is Dakota. So there's Dakota, Lakota, and several other names, but they're all what are usually called Sioux. But, you know, people were coming from everywhere, and the Anishinaabe, who were also called Ojibwe or Chippewa, were pretty close, and they had a really strong presence. And so this water ceremony was theirs. They're kind of water people. And to be in this ceremony, well, you're standing around and the prayers have finished, and they get some women to get water in copper vessels, and they go around and they give you a little paper cup and they pour some water in the paper cup. And I didn't know what to do with it the first time, but I learned that you're going to keep this paper cup, and it's going to take an hour or so to walk down to the river. And we're walking slowly. There are chants sometimes. Sometimes they stop to honor the 4 directions. And it's sort of like you don't know what's going on, but go along. And try not to get frozen. And then they asked all the men to come to the front. I was like, well, okay. So they do things. They do men things and women things very separately. And women were supposed to wear skirts, and I did. But they didn't throw anybody out for not wearing one. So it was extremely gentle. They were extremely gentle to those of us whose ancestors conquered and killed their ancestors. Because that's one of the things that moved me. So they had the men line up. So you went down to the river, and there were 2 places. There's kind of a Y, and the men lined all of these, and it was all hard-packed snow and a little slippery. And the first time I went down, and the men were holding their hands out, and I was like, I can do this. And the second time, I got it. And it was like, I am going to take every hand I can. There were men with no hats on. Has anybody lived in a place where it's below zero a lot? I mean, below Fahrenheit 0. Yeah. Yeah. Where, you could die in 2 hours or something. So there were men with no gloves on. There were men with no hats on, and they were holding their hands out. And the energy of that giving and receiving was like a miracle. I couldn't believe it. Men will never be the same for me again. And I think there's a kind of thing about sacrifice there. It's like they could have worn hats. Some of them did. But it was like they were going completely all out. And so once I saw it, I took every hand I could. And sometimes I went like this to help warm them up a little bit. I was wearing gloves. I had a hat. I had on plenty of stuff. And then you go down, you wake your way along, and one at a time, well, 2 at a time, because they're 2 places, you go down by the river, you offer a bit of tobacco, which there were lots of people there to give you tobacco. And once I brought tobacco, and I could give it away to people, and that was very nice. And you can pour your little water in there, and you can offer your tobacco, and you can say a prayer. So praying by the water is a thing. And you say the prayer, and you can take as long as you want. Nobody was excessive, but it didn't matter. We were just all there for the duration. And then you come back up, and somebody will help you if you have trouble getting up. People with physical disabilities would get help to the front of the line. And then, you go back, and there are people there offering you blankets. And the blankets were kind of nice because we've been outside a long time now, and it's really cold. And then we wait a long time for all the women to finish praying. And then the men go and pray, and the women stood by the sides and held out our hands to support them. And then after everyone had finished praying, there were some group prayers. There's this phrase, mini wichoni, which means water is life. And there was a song that I can't reproduce. I wish I had not forgotten it. But I remember saying, mini wichoni, and everybody chants back, and then water is life, and everybody shouts it back. And then I asked for other languages. And so people who were there from all parts of the world would say water is life in their language, and we would say it back. And the only other language I know is American Sign Language, which, you can't, but I went, water is life. And somebody knew it. One of the Native women who was a leader knew this. And so she got it, and for the rest of the time I was there, she would get up there very visibly and go, and everybody would go. It was like, it was so inclusive. It was a miracle. I don't know what to say about it. The feeling of being welcomed and being taken care of. When it was time for me to leave, well, there was worse weather coming in, and the request had been granted supposedly, and so they were kind of telling people to go home, and I was going home at that time anyway. But I've suddenly found myself, my tent needs propane. Somebody goes and gives me some propane and hands it to me. I could take it to the tent. I need a sleeping bag. I go to the place where donated stuff is. I say, can I have a sleeping bag? And they hand me a sleeping bag, no questions. was just, I mean, incredible hardship and incredible abundance, and the sense of giving was so rich. And meanwhile, we know now that the kind of tactics that were being used, I never went to the front lines, which was on a certain bridge. And not a lot of stuff happened there while I was there. But we do know that, that the kind of tactics that they were using against the people who were on the front lines were military tactics by, I forget the name, somebody who's kind of the counterpart of Blackwater. Anyway, really, really extreme tactics. People got hurt, people got permanently injured. A lot of people got sick for a long time. We think they were spraying us with chemicals. It's just, and the propaganda was incredible. And I would have thought that I would have gone to the front lines, but I never got there. I was busy surviving. Oh, and I found some other Buddhists, and we did do a half-day sit. And we did some sitting every day. But, so, it was interesting. It's like, if I have a strong desire for something, I notice that it's a good idea to honor it. And so the person who came home is not the person who went. And I can't remember the person who went very well. That connection happened because of the walk, because I met people on the walk who were involved in protecting their earth and their water. And so later on, people were protecting the earth, and they're doing it for all of us, but they're the ones who are being hurt the most. So I don't know. I make an effort to be a supporter of the indigenous people, specifically around these protection in land and water issues. I don't feel like I do nearly as much as a lot of people I know. But it's part of how I orient myself. It's like, these are the people who are going to save us. They're already saving us. You know, we now have, that pipeline is in trouble. Some other things, you know, they're leading those of us who want to protect the earth, and they're leading from a spiritual base. And their spiritual base is not identical with Buddhism, but it's close enough. Their details are very different, but I feel really connected with them. And I'm supposed to be done talking. Okay, so this other thing that I do, which started when I got back from the walk, and I've been working on it for 3-4 years now, I don't know. It's called the Mountains and Waters Alliance. And there's a logic in that term. Well, I'll just say that one time at the end, so I bought this farm. It's in a really pretty place. And my intention was to take care of the land, to grow food. When the crisis comes, to be able to feed a lot more people than myself, and to have a spiritual community. I was never a farmer, and so it's been difficult. But I also, every month, sit at least 3 days. And sometimes people come and sit with me. And at the end of one of those that I was doing alone, I went out and walked in the woods, and I asked the trees to help me. And I heard them answer. And it was funny. I mean, I don't remember the details. I just remember walking and feeling like I heard them saying, yes, we'll help you. And that's become the theme since then. After that walk, the term Mountains and Waters Alliance came into my mind. What I say to people is, well, you know, climate change has gone so far, it's not stoppable. We are doomed. But the logic of we are doomed assumes no miracles, and it assumes that only humans are doing anything. And so I propose that humans need to get off of our arrogance and our idea that we're in charge and ask for help. And we need to ask for help really humbly because our behavior is like embarrassing, to say the least. So this is what I've been doing. In the morning, I do sitting meditation. I do some chanting in my tradition style. And I do something that one would call healing or energy work. And it's directed towards, something different. For a while I was doing, let's do one for an individual and one for some big picture. The one I'm doing right now, it's like every day I decide what it's going to be. And where is it? Oh, there it is. The one I'm doing right now is asking the earth to rise up in defense of itself. And then I have a whole list of different things, different components of that. The first one being support from humans, consciousness and action. I've noticed that we've had some better court decisions lately. So I put court actions in there, I put mass resistance in there, and then I put a lot of things. I have to remember, I keep forgetting that if I'm asking for help from the forests and the mountains and the flowers and the insects and all of them, everybody in the whole community of life, and I do include minerals and so forth. I can't defend that, but I do. That when I make one of these lists, I have to include them in who I'm strengthening. I'm asking them, I'm giving them energy, and I'm asking them for help. And what I notice is, even though I'm a Buddhist, and I know it's sentient beings, it's not just human people, I notice how incredibly hard it is to remember that. Most recently, I've gotten lost in fighting quackgrass, which is the grass that would like to take over your garden. It'll take over your lawn. I'd rather not have a lawn, but the quackgrass wants to take it over. The strawberries, you can't even see them because the quackgrass is this high. And so there's this war going on with them and with the pocket gophers and with the buckthorn, and I mean, these are like Minnesota's problem plants, and there are plenty more of them. How can I get out of the mind of war? That is my current question right now. Never mind my war with Trump supporters. I don't want to be at war with them either. But it's like the mind of war is so persistent. It's a mind of colonizing, and it's the mind that surrounds me and that I was raised with. And so that's what I'm studying right now. And I ask for help. So, and now I will stop and ask for questions or whatever. Let's start with questions, though. Yes?
I'm sure you already have, but have you looked into some of the permaculture stuff to try to help you?
I have a permaculture design certificate in an advanced permaculture class. The great thing that happened recently is another permaculturist has shown up who lives in the city but would like to move to the country. Because I haven't persuaded anybody to move in with me yet. It might be because I'm a difficult person. It might be because I have lots of rules like, what do you mean you want to drink water in a plastic bottle? Our water comes from the roof. What do you mean you have trash? we have to haul it away. We don't do trash here. So, I mean, I have little things that are normal to me, but are not normal to most Americans. But anyway, so I have somebody now who knows permaculture better than I do, and he also knows something about making money with plants, which is desperately essential because I'm job hunting, because my attempts to make money from the farm are totally not working. I'm currently studying a book called Weeds, Control Without Poisons, which actually is about how to not be at war with the weeds. It's wonderful. I'm really excited about it. I don't know why it took me so long to find it, but it's like, because I want to learn how not to be at war with the natural world around me. And if I'm lucky, I'll also learn how not to be at war with the humans. Thanks. Question or comments?
You say you're living on a farm and you're a Buddhist. Do you have a community of some sort, or how do you, just get together with others for
Right.
meditation?
So I'm pretty lonely. I started a group in a town that's 10 miles away from me. I started it while I was still living in town. But we meet 2 or 3 times a month, and some of them have been out to a retreat at the farm. And it's an interesting thing because my role is teacher there. So, although they're not, it's like I don't feel like I'm parenting them, but I feel like I have this role of teacher. The other thing I do, I'm an hour's drive away from Minneapolis and St. Paul, and a couple of times a month I go to a study group which is all ordained priests. And there I get to relax and just, and we study a text. So that's good. And I'm in the area, I have other community, but it's not Buddhist. I'm back in the place where I first practiced Buddhism. And so the people who were 10 years ahead of me or 15 years ahead of me when I started are still there. And so that's nice. But I would like, if some people have come and visited me at the farm, they just haven't moved in. So I'm wishing for people to come and move in. But I'm being cautious because I want them to be interested in practice and I want them to, take responsibility. I mean, I've got a lot of things going on. You got to be an environmentalist, and you don't have to be a Buddhist, but it helps, and that's really a lot of things.
What do you mean by this concept of the earth rising up in defenceless?
Ah.
To explain it a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's a phrase that just came to me, but I could give one example that I could give, and I don't know if this is what's happened, but so American politics, Trump got elected, and then he became president, and then he immediately said, give the permits and let them finish drilling that pipeline. Whereas Obama had at the very last minute said, no, you need an environmental review. So they started drilling again. It wasn't going very fast. I hear that the drill bits kept breaking on rocks and things. Now, you don't want to say for sure that was the earth rising up in defense, but kind of maybe. There was a time, when was it? A Florida had a lot of hurricanes, and it went through a particular section of Florida. This is really shaky. This is like bad Dharma. But people were observing that all the places that got hit by Florida were places that had gone for George Bush in the election. Look at the faces Beth is making.
So that means that if something bad happens to San Francisco Zen Center,
Right, yeah. That's why you can't do it. I mean, yeah, I mean, look at Tassajara's gotten burned down twice, almost. Yeah, so you can't go there. So that was bad, but,
It seems to me in terms of that concept that, first of all, the idea of fighting for peace is kind of just shooting yourself in the foot. And we come to ask, this entity, energy, indifferent presence, whatever it is, that is the earth perhaps. And we are attempting to create some sort of defense system of the earth and its own integrity. And in terms of, say, martial arts, when attacked, you embrace and dance with.
are you an Aikidoist?
Yes.
I was an Aikidoist. Yes.
So there's that sort of sense of how can we, without scaring the bejesus out of ourselves, oh my God, all right, I think you need to defend yourself, but don't send a hurricane or an earthquake or a mudslide, to me. People, do you know what I mean? People get
People
kind
do
of,
that, yeah.
Yeah, they get quite frightened by the idea of it. So to be able to manifest that in our own consciousness is important, I agree. But how do we do it? How do we express it? How do we move people in a way that they start to understand the need for, without frightening them, because people are very easily frightened.
Yeah.
That's the,
Yeah.
the question. I haven't got an answer or a well-formed question, I'm sorry.
But I think you brought us back into Dharma. Whereas that last thing I said was really bad. I try not to say really bad things in public.
don't we all?
Yeah, right. I'm trying to think of a response. I don't know. It's like, yeah, it's like not fighting, and yet we want the movement to happen. And so I get excited whenever I see, for instance, whenever I see a positive court decision, and I get sad when I see a bad one. They really should have had some consequences for the guy that shot, the police officer that shot Philandro Castile, which was back home. There are lots of them, but he got off. What I'm not so successful at is staying with equanimity and not getting involved. It's like you can't get involved in, did this have that effect? Somebody congratulated me after the walk. Someone congratulated me on stopping the KXL, the Keystone Pipeline, and I looked at, because people kept saying, what good did it do? We do not know. But the energy of protest is a problem. But the energy of prayer is not a problem. And the energy of kindness and generosity.
I think the energy of prayer is a problem.
Talk about it.
God, give me this. I want this. So that sort of prayer where you're asking for something, to me prayer is an act of gratitude for what is as it is, which is a really hard thing to do when what you see in front of you is less than desirable to your current level of
So, thank you for that, because that's the challenge. You know, I use the term prayer not like I grew up with it as a Christian. And in fact, the Christians who trained me, they weren't so much into that kind of prayer either. They were like, well, you know, I mean, that's all about greed and manipulation. But the Native American kind of prayer doesn't have the manipulative feel. They do have, well, I don't know. I think I won't try to guess. But yeah, whenever we go, so when I do this, you know, asking the earth to rise up in its own defense, it's like, you know, this is borderline, but all of our, like pure practice would be just to stay with gratitude. And so I'm in kind of muddy practice, you know, I'm in a, and so I'm constantly asking questions. And so I really thank you for your comments and questions. Okay, you were next?
Well, just that one of the things of living in Japan was interesting was in Tokyo, we're overdue for the big one. And it's
Right.
interesting, nobody moves away. And I didn't leave Japan because of the earthquake fear. That was totally irrelevant to me. I mean, and you'd be sitting there and the quake would be going on. And you'd go, oh, well, that's 30 seconds. It's not quite long, but it's not going up and down yet. So it was okay. You know, when I first went, I couldn't imagine that. But you can reach it, and that's, I think, that people have come to peace with the fact that the big one can come. And when it comes, an awful lot of people are going to die in the fires that follow.
Right.
And it's going to be a disaster, but it's put to one side.
Yeah.
You know, it's put to one side, and I didn't even think about that until I heard this conversation. You know, it's possible to come to peace with the fact that yes, you might suffer in that the earth rising up.
Right.
But
We might suffer.
yes, but
And it's like, I don't think about it. I did move to a place where I'm close to my children and where I think climate change will be, well, I can see it, but there are a lot of worse places. So I chose that. I was moving anyway.
Global warming will help Minnesota.
I will refrain from telling you what's already problematic. The fact that I had to spend an hour a day watering my baby plants last week. But yeah, milder winters would be okay.
I was just going to say, as a Canadian, sorry for the Keystone Pipeline, but
Oh, right, yeah.
you know, even Justin doesn't want it per se, and most Canadians are against it. But Alberta's economy, you know, started to tank, and most of us were happy when Barack rejected it. But it's one of those things. But I mean, I think the biggest problem, not that I can encapsulate the entire issue, but is that when you got ExxonMobil telling Trump it was a bad idea to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord, you know we're at some crossroads,
Yeah,
When
right.
Mobil is lecturing him, and telling him what to say,
Right.
we're definitely at the crossroads. And
Yeah, it's sort of interesting. His getting elected, which is embarrassing. I think most of the world understands, because now we know what happens in, I think they used to call them banana republics, where our government is totally not under our control. So I'm like, well, okay, people are taking more responsibility and nobody is waiting for the government to do it for them anymore. Shall we stop?
Well, I think people who would like to stop because it's been a full day,
Right.
but
Yeah.
it's up to you. But maybe you want to talk informally while we put everything away
Yeah.
with the people who still have questions.
Yeah, that'd be fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that sound like a good compromise? All right, and can I have Andrew to supervise the putting away room?
If I can figure out how.
Huh?
If I can figure out how.
You know how to do that. Well, do I have someone here who's comfortable with?
I can do that.
You know how to do it. The big ones go on the far right, the blue ones go next to them, and everything else needs to makes the door still able to close.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I would like to say, Shodo, obviously donations today go to Shodo. She lives on a shoestring.